Have you ever felt beat up by life? All right, I'll take that as a yes. Life can make us feel kind of beat up. Well, we can have something which isn't really terrible, but we'll just start there with disappointments. Then things start getting worse, like hurts, some worse than others, illness, injuries, surgery, mental abuse, physical abuse, sexual or emotional abuse. Those things can make us feel beat up. And like we are damaged goods. Reminds me of a time some years ago when I received a package. It might have been through the mail, but I'm not sure. But I received a package at the house, and it was all kind of smashed a little bit. You know, it was coming apart at the corners, and it was torn up a little bit, and they had some tape over it to try to keep it together. And you know, the address label was partly off, and all that. So I was taped on there too. But it came with a note, and the note said something like this: "Damaged in transit, but deliverable." Well, I'm glad it was deliverable because I wanted whatever was in there at the time, but it can also describe us a little bit. Damaged in transit, but deliverable. That's part of what's going on in that first reading from the book of Maccabees. That was written not even 200 years before Jesus. And in that book, the Jewish people, at least some of them, are coming to believe in a God who is not just a God of this world, but a God of life, and that there is an afterlife with God. And that, in fact, is what's given them hope and strength, because the most recent invading country, I think it was Syria, the king wanted to make them to refuse and reject their religion. So the way to do that was to get them to eat pork. Now, it might sound silly to us, but that was a symbol for them of following the law of God. They could have chosen something else, but then they're going to make them eat pork. So that means that you reject your religion and you'll worship our gods. So they refused to do it. We saw this, we heard the thing about the 7 brothers, and we were spared the descriptions today of all 7 of them, how they were cruelly tortured. But we did get from 2 of them to say that I am true to my God, and I will not eat that pork. I will not disobey the law. I will not be unfaithful to the God who is faithful to me. They knew where they were going. They were going to God. And they believed that there was life not only here, but hereafter. They were on that journey, and they didn't want to get off it. They wanted to get to God. So they were focused in an afterlife. Life here, but they're willing to give that up for the life forever. And that topic of an afterlife is also what's going on in the gospel, because the Sadducees didn't believe in it. They weren't the part of the Jewish people who believed in an afterlife, so they thought, we'll catch Jesus and make him look silly. So they said, let's say a woman gets married and she has 7 husbands, they all die. Now, who's going to be her husband when she dies? But Jesus says, it's not like that. It's not like that in the afterlife, because it is different. Thanks be to God. Because they were saying, well, it's just going to be the same old, same old. What we got here is what we'll get there. Well, thanks be to God that Jesus said it's not going to be the same old, same old. Because if that would be, I think, a little bit unbearable for eternity. To get kind of beat up and bruised along the way as we feel it here. That would be unbearable. Jesus says it's not that way. And it would be different when we're with God. He offers us a good life with him. It gives people hope. It gives people strength. But you might say, how do we know that this isn't just wishful thinking? Somebody makes this up. How do we know that? We know that because Jesus Christ has already risen from the dead, and the power of his resurrection is already available to us. It is not limited. It is present in this world and present and available to us. And I have some evidence for that. I'll share just a little bit of it with you. Part of the evidence for that are people who have been addicted to something, be it alcohol or pornography or drugs or food or whatever it was, and they are recovering. And you talk to them and ask, is this real for you? They're going to say yes. Because when they are in the depths and the dregs of their life, some of them out on the street. I've known people like this. I've heard many other stories. When they're out on the street and down and out, and they finally get to the place where they say, okay, I can't do it. So they go through, there's a 12-step process. The first 3 steps. The first one is to admit that you're powerless over your addiction, whatever it is. I'm powerless over those things that are controlling my life. The second is that we believe that God, a power being God, can help bring me to sanity. And the third is to make the decision to let God into my life and give him my will. Give my will over to him. That's intentionally choosing a God who is there, and lo and behold, the power's there. To live one day at a time and to walk away from the addiction and a trashed life to make another life. I've seen it, maybe you have too. It can work. That power is there when they make the decision to let God in. Or I've also seen it in people who have lost a loved one, be it a spouse, or even, some of you have heard, even worse, a child. And how do you get up from that? I've seen it here in this parish. Someone has been married for 50 or 60 years, and they were just like this, and now one of them is gone. How do you get up from that? Or from losing a child? How do you go on from there? I'm not pretending that that's easy. I'm only saying that the power of Christ makes it possible to get out of bed in the morning. It makes it possible to believe in something more. That first of all, their loved one is not just wiped off in oblivion, but have a life next with God. And that can keep us going. I knew a guy in Terre Haute. He said, just love this guy. But his wife had died before I became pastor there, and he was just kind of going on, good guy, involved in stuff. He says, Father, I'm trying to be good. I said, well, that's good. He says, you know why? I said, well, not exactly. He says, I want to be good because I want to make sure I get to heaven where my wife is. There's a belief. There's something more. And that power made him get up and live life again. Not to say he wasn't a little bruised and battered and beat up. He still carried that with him, as the alcoholic or any other addict does. He still carried those bruises and those scars and all that with us. But there's more than that. It's beyond. I'll just give you one other piece of evidence. And that's when people are stuck in sin and guilt. And they feel that their life isn't worth living, that God couldn't possibly love them. We're just stuck in guilt because of what we've done. And sitting in that confessional over there, or wherever it's been, as a confessor, I have heard people come in and unload what it is that they've done. Been able to say, God's a God of mercy. And he came to free you from that sin so that you don't punish yourself. And you can get up and move on. You can be forgiven and healed. And I know even more than that, because I've been the one who also confesses. Sometimes it's been difficult to do that because I felt so badly about my own mistakes. And I know what it's feel like to walk away from that, having had a priest pray the prayer of absolution, guaranteeing me that in faith we believe God forgives us and sets us free. And that's the power of Christ. That's the power of the risen Christ in our life. And I believe we're not making it up, that it's real. And to live that way doesn't just kind of happen. To live that way, it takes intentional living. That I live with intention, this faith. As the alcoholic had to, or whatever addict had to say, and I make the decision to give my will to God. I make the decision to get out of bed and make something more of my life until I am with my loved one again. I make the decision to let God forgive me and to try to live a new life with His help. I make the decision intentionally to move beyond here and develop a relationship with Christ, to come to know Him and let Him know me. Let Him into my heart. Let Him into my life. And if there's anybody in here who says, I know enough about Christ and I don't think we can go any farther, I propose that you don't know what you're talking about. God is always more than we know. He always invites us deeper into life, where it begins to change us, because we intentionally follow Him and intentionally build a relationship with Him. It is the way it is. It just doesn't happen. A wise person named Anonymous once said that our faith gives us hope. And hope works in these ways. Now listen to these. These are all active verbs. Okay? Intentional, active verbs. Hope works in these ways. It looks for the good in people instead of harping on the worst. As believing people in Jesus Christ, that's what we're called to do. It discovers what can be done instead of grumbling about what cannot. Wouldn't that be great if everybody did that? Let Christ's power in their life move us to see what can be done, what we can make better around here. It regards problems, large or small, as opportunities. I think that one's a little more difficult, but all right. Finally, it pushes ahead when it would be easy to quit. Power of Christ can work that way in our lives. And we are called to intentionally live that way, following Christ. And when we make that choice, what happens is that our lives are filled with His love and His power, and somebody else just might be able to see that there's something more going on with us, and they want what we got. They want that kind of faith. They want that kind of joy. They want that kind of strength that enables us to mourn with them as well as rejoice with them. That comes through. That's called being intentional about living this life of faith. That's the faith we're called to live. It's the faith we've been given. What a wonderful faith. But it needs to be lived. And it needs to be lived with intention. I'm going to close with that second reading, part of it. It says, may the Lord Jesus Christ Himself and God the Father encourage your hearts and strengthen them in every good deed and word. Because the power of Christ, the risen Christ, is available to us now to strengthen us and encourage us in every good deed and word.